Anyway, shall I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for joining my premiere on the internet. You saw that it was not that easy. It's the first time, and it's the first time for me that I don't see or feel the audience. I don't have your reaction, whether you are a bit skeptic about what I'm saying or you agree. I don't know whether I'm talking too fast. If so, Paolo, please tell me. But we should start now. The problem with palm oil is that most of it is about perception, and most of the people have no clue about the facts. And the question is, what do people see and hear when it's about palm oil? The first thing they see is burning rainforest, and that nobody likes, of course, these pictures, but they are repeatedly shown on television and in newspapers and so on. The second one they see is brands which are changed into something negative, like here the orangutan and the Nestle KitKat is not called KitKat anymore, but Killer. And with that climate change debate in 2015, Greenpeace warned that the amount of carbon dioxide which was released when you burn the Indonesian forest was equivalent to the emissions of the UK. And all of that is only emotional, and nobody knows really the facts behind it. And what I want to do with you is we will come to what people don't see and hear about this, and this is palm oil, which means this is a palm fruit. And there is an English saying that half a truth is a complete lie. Many of the things that you see and read are partly true, but they are said in order to mislead you and have a different impression. The question that we have to ask ourselves in this world, is truth really stronger than fiction? You can have your doubts, you decide, but what you need and what we need is facts. And only with facts we can do a sober assessment. An overview of a journey through many, many different aspects of palm oil, more from a management side, a political side, but also with some facts from natural science. And you can easily, of course, read that. I don't have to read that to you. The problem is that all of this is overshadowed by politics, by perception, and by self-interest. As I don't know how many of you know well about fats and oils, I decided for a quick introduction. So we have fats and oils. They are either of animal or vegetable origin. Animal fats and oils are milk fats, rendering fats, and marine oils. And vegetable fats are seed oils such as soybean and sunflower, pulp oils as olive and palm, and also some more modern yeast, algae, and bacteria. These are extremely interesting because they have the ability to supply us with very, very rare and very special fatty acids. However, it is very difficult to gain these, and the residues, the waste, is not very easy to handle. What's the difference between fats and oils? And you will see that later, that possibly what we call palm kernel fat, you would call palm kernel oil in Brazil. The difference is simply it's the same stuff, and it's a fat if it's solid, and it's an oil when it's liquid. And whether it's liquid or solid is just the temperature of the environment. The question is now, why do we need that much of oils and fats? The first thing that we had was industrialization, but that is more than 100 years ago. People came from the rural areas into the town, and they needed something to eat. They were working very hard. They needed a lot of calories, and fat was excellent, but that is past. We had wars, And as you know, war is the mother of many inventions, also in the fat arena. The French king in 1869 thought that he would go into war with Prussia, with Germany, and so he asked somebody to invent sort of a butter, which his people could take to the front line and eat. And that was the birth of margarine, but that is also past. War is still it's still an innovation trigger, but not for food. The next one is indulgence. And everyone knows that if you eat something with a lot of fat, it smells better and it tastes very much better than when it's dry and without fat. But that is not so much the question of how much we eat, it's the question that it's there. The most interesting part is the standard of living and urbanization. People tend to move into cities all over the world, and that is closely linked, the standard of living, with urbanization. And when you see, why do we then need that much? When you are a low income, not a poor one, a low income one, not somebody who is in starvation, then what you eat is roughly 2,400 calories per day. When you are middle class, you take 25% more, 3,000. And now you see that in 2010, 3 billion people were middle class, and in 2030, 5 billion are expected in middle class. Which means that you have to feed 2 billion people more with something like half of the calories that they need more. But it's more even when you look into countries. Let's take the two big countries, China with a population of 1.45 billion, and they had a per capita consumption of 7 kilograms per year in 1990, and then they changed their style of living. It became more Western, and they became wealthier. So what they need more in 2020 is 27 kilograms. And when you quickly calculate it, that means 29 million tons of oils and fats. Adding to it India, 1.5 billion people, the increase was less, it was only 11. But when you then see how much we eat in the US, 58, in Europe 45, and even only assuming that they come close to South America, then you see that from today, it is 10 kilograms more, another 14.5 million, and from India it's 20 more, another 30 million tons. And that means that additionally to the increasing population that we have, we will need more fats and oils. The other question is, why does it need to be vegetable? There is so much lard and tallow around, but it's some very simple reasons. Animal fat supply by far is not sufficient to meet the demand. Then we have, starting from the Western countries, animal care issues. We don't allow for mass production, or we allow, but there is a tendency that it is becoming more and more difficult, that people don't like it. We have some health issues. We taught the people since the 1970s that animal fat is bad for your health, and you have marketing issues. Our marketing also told the people, eat vegetable fat, that's much better for you. The question is, why do we need fats and not oils? We are not short in oils, we are short in fat. And the reason is the climate in which the plants live. In chemistry, a reaction can only take place when it's in the liquid or in a state of vapor, which means when it's solid, there will be no chemical reaction. When you see the plants, then they store fat, as an energy reserve, and when they germinate, they want to activate the energy reserve within hours. They manage normally in a seed to activate all the energy within 12 hours. And that means it has to be liquid at environmental temperature. And that means there are more fats and more oils in the world, because most of the oils come from moderate climate countries than fats. So far, we could help ourselves. And what we did, we hardened oil and we had fat. And that was a patent that Norman gained in 1902. And the question now is, why not carry on with that? There is several reasons. Again, the first one is fearing trans fatty acids. When you look in a chemistry book, then all they say to you when it's about hydrogenation or hardening, this is the source of many trans fatty acids, which of course is not true. When you completely harden, there is no trans fatty acid left, and that is also what we did. One also has to say that the industry used trans fatty acid. They like to use it because their melting point is higher than of the cis fatty acids, and in the past they could be declared unsaturated, which is not the case anymore today. And now in these modern times, these fatty acids, the hardened fatty acids, are regarded chemical and unnatural. And marketing made very clear to the people, you shouldn't eat it. We give you an alternative. But marketing didn't know what they trigger. And last not least, it's, as always, it's about money. When you don't harden, when you use fractionated palm oil, it is much cheaper. And the question now is, why then palm oil? First of all, a very fast overview about palms, oil palms. There is, of course, first the ordinary oil palm, which you also call American oil palm. Then we have babassu. I only brought that in because there was a hype in Brazil some 30 years ago where everybody thought they could feed the world with babassu. One of the problems of babassu is that it grows wild, so you have to go into the woods and collect it. And the other one is that it has a stone shell, and 90% of that fruit is the shell and only 10% is the oil. And it's extremely difficult to crack it, and it is even more difficult to get rid of the waste. And then, of course, we have the coconut palm. We will talk about oil palm only today. And you can also see when you read this, which is on the website of a coconut company in Germany, they say coconut oil is no palm oil. And that makes you suspicious. Why do they say that? And you will see in the course of the lecture, palm oil has a very bad reputation, and they just want to make sure that this is coconut. This is no palm oil, which of course is not true. Where do oil palms grow? You see here the green belt around the equator. There is the right climate. There is the right sunshine hours for oil palms to grow. And there is where oil palms came from. And you see here the milestones for feeding the world. In 1935, the USA made soybean their oil, soybean that came from China. In 1965, we managed to make rapeseed oil convenient also for more moderate climates in the north. In 1975, the palm oil wonder starts. I come to that. Then we had the zero rape breeding, no glucosinolates in the rape, and so the meal could be used for feeding animals. Then soybean traveled south. GMO soybean were introduced with some difficulties in Europe. And then we have the biodiesel era starting. using up a lot of edible, not only oils, but also corn, for instance. And the exponential growth of palm oil production began. So the question now is, what is the wonder? This is palm, and you see that a palm fruit is growing whenever there is a branch of a leaf. Always between the stem and the leaf, there will be a flower, and from that flower, you will get the palm fruit. And here you see how it's harvested. You have very long sticks of bamboo, and you cut here the leaf, and then you also cut the fruit, and it falls down to the ground and is collected. Where did it all start? It started in British West Africa. And you see here, that was all British colonies, some French colonies in between. And the Brits thought, what can we do? Let's shift it to other colonies. And these other colonies were in Southeast Asia. And it went to Malaysia with the former name of Strait Settlements. First of all, smallholders began to plant palms, but then it took off in an industrial scale. Rubber trees were not needed anymore because artificial rubber had been invented. So they started converting rubber tree plantations into palm tree plantations. Then there was an increase in yield. We will come to that later. And of course, the demand was growing and there was logging for new plantations. And something like 30 years ago, circular economy started. And what they did is everything that was formerly burned on the plantation was reused. And that was in close cooperation between planters and the industry. And then after that, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, an intense cooperation with NGOs began. But what was then the wonder indeed that you needed? This is a well-pollinated fruit from Africa. And what you see here is a fruit from Malaysia. And nobody knew why the same oil palm that was well-pollinated in Africa had almost no yield in Malaysia. And so what they tried to do is improve the pollination. And what they did is they had a device here. They had water. They took the pollen from the male flower, put it in here with water, and then with sort of a shower, they brought it on the female flowers in order to pollinate them. But still, of course, that was a process that was expensive and difficult to do. And also the pollination was still much worse than here in Africa. And then Unilever started with a British institute and asked them to find out why that was. And they found out that this beetle was doing the pollination in Africa. It's Elaedobius camerunicus, and you can call him the salvator of palm oil in Malaysia. But the Brits were a bit more clever than before. After they had the disaster with rabbits and dingoes in Australia and other animals that they brought in intentionally or unintentionally, they said, we have to check first what we do if we bring this beetle to Malaysia. So that was the first big-scale ecologically motivated action, and Unilever worked together with the Commonwealth Institute of Biological Research. And the project duration was 2 years, and it had a positive result. And the result was the beetle is exclusively living on oil palms, and it does not steal other species' habitat. And the conclusion from that was you can immigrate that beetle to Malaysia without disturbing nature. And that is what they did. And here you see the result. it was in that time very bad yields. And then all of a sudden, when that beetle came in, it took off. And you saw also here that Indonesia joined the club. Indonesia was almost nothing in 1980 compared to Malaysia. But you can see here that Indonesia overtook Malaysia. And what you can also see is that other countries are steadily climbing up. And here you have the summary, which is something like 75 million tons of production. When you read something about soybean or sunflower, then be careful. With palm, it's always the oil. When you read production figures about soybeans, it is very often it's the bean. And the bean only holds 20% of oil. So you have to take it, the 20% to compare. And here you can see palm oil production compared to the three other main oils, which is sunflower, rapeseed oil, and bean oil. And here animal fat. You can see animal fat roughly constant. A little bit more of rapeseed, something more doubling sunflower. Bean oil is taking off, also because somewhere here it was introduced to South America here. And the most successful oil is palm oil. And palm oil will in 2020 account for 1/3 of all the world's edible oil production. Some quick words on palm oil production. What you see here is the fruit, and you have the pulp outside from which you get the oil. And inside you have the palm kernel fat. And when you have a palm bundle, then you see that roughly 2/3 is the fruit. And then again, a bit more than 2/3 is the oil. The rest is water and fibers. When you see the nuts, it is the hull is more than 50%. And in the kernel, then the oil is half. So half of half, something like 25% is the fat, while here it is much more. And you can also see the summary. Palm oil yields roughly 25% of the bundle weight, and palm kernel fat only 2.5 points. Characteristics. You see here the fatty acid composition of palm oil. And I marked the unsaturated fatty acids in green and the saturated fatty acids in blue. So when you listen to nutritionalists, then they tell you, of course, that unsaturated fats are much better than saturated fats. The opinion changed over time. We'll come to that. And you have one thing which is seen as a problem, which is, palmitic acid. You see 45% of the palm oil fatty acids is palmitic acid. And palmitic acid was regarded bad. But before we come to that, a little comparison to the palm oil and the palm kernel oil. And you see the big difference, almost only saturated in the palm kernel part, and almost only, not almost only, but something like 50-50 in palm oil. The important thing about palm kernel is palmitic acid. Oh, sorry, I was wrong there. It was lauric acid. That is why fats like that, coconut and also palm kernel fat, are called laurics. And I won't come too much back on that, but lauric acid is extremely important for the industry. So far, the industry did not find any way of replacing lauric acid in oleochemicals and detergents. But we further concentrate on the palm oil. And why is it so important? Palm oil, when you put it on a table in moderate climates, a liquid will separate from a solid. And that is something very special, which you don't find in any other oil. You have it a bit in groundnut oil, but only 3 to 4%. But in palm oil, it's much more. So what you can do, you can fractionate it, separate it by melting point. And when you do that at 30 degrees, then you get 20% of the stearine with a relatively high melting point of 52%. And then you get 80% of palm oil, which has a cloud point, you can't say melting point here anymore, of 5%. If you carry on and you do it again at 17, then you have a superolefin with a cloud point even lower. But for the normal usage, this first step of fractionation is sufficient. And you can use the stearine as a fat. You see that, 52 degrees melting point. And this one you can use as a salad oil. So this, to a certain extent, or to a higher extent, remains in the countries of origin, where people use it as a cooking oil or as a salad oil, while this, to a much higher extent, goes to the countries in the north, who are rich in oil, but who are lacking fat. Are there alternatives? Yes, there are. You could harden again, but that is, at least in Europe, no way, because it has a very bad image. What about the world around it? And then you see that what I said before, politics and so on came in. And there is a very, very nice article of Shakira Jacob on the politics of the United States against Malaysian palm oil. And it was in the mid-1960s that Malaysian palm oil began to penetrate the US markets, and everyone was worried. When you go back to that picture of how much palm oil was around, then you see that there was almost no palm oil in the 1960s. But Americans were so afraid that palm oil would steal the revenue from soybean that they started campaigning. And the reason you can see here, 6 times more oil per hectare in palm oil. So it was much, much cheaper. And what they then said is they united, you see here USDA, that's the US Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and people in the Congress. And they asked for import duties, for quotas, for palm oil labeling, and the protection of US soy producers. In 1987, the houses of the US Parliament demanded again the same, and they demanded mandatory labeling of palm oil. And the problem is that the Food and Drug Administration, this is an independent body which should tell people, or which should make sure that no harmful products can be marketed. They made themselves a vehicle of the politicians, and they set up some very strange sayings about palm oil, so that the other people had a reason, an official and what they thought neutral reason to go against palm oil. And then there was somebody who they call a national evangelist, an entrepreneur and a millionaire, a multimillionaire. And he started in 1919 and in 1988 a campaign, and that campaign was called Poisoning the US. Now, with all of that, and with that bad image, and what can you do when people tell the consumers that they get sick when they eat too much palm oil? Palm oil could be reduced in the US by far. The United States are the country with the least share of palm oil compared to all others in the world. But there were also scientists like David Haber from the University of California in Los Angeles who called the whole hype about bad palm oil a tornado in a teacup. But how can we see that from today? First of all, the US campaign fitted into a historic sequence. There was a Danish guy called Dyersberg and Bang, and Ars Jørgensen. He was the the foremost, and they, in the 1960s, investigated Inuit in Greenland, and they found that they had no heart infarction. So they looked into their diet and they saw that they don't eat saturated fatty acids because they take only the fatty acids from whales, from robs, and from penguins, and so on. And cardiologists were focusing on the fatty acids. And they did not regard palm oil fatty acids as positive. There was this palmitic acid thing, and also it was too saturated. However, the findings on this changed constantly, and the difference in evaluation of certain fatty acids shrinked more and more. Everything that was extremely bad in the past, we call today, yeah, it's positive, possibly not that positive, but it's also not that bad. And many things that were regarded bad in the past, like stearic acid, is seen neutral today. But in the focus, palmitic acid. And I want to also to focus on palmitic acid. Before you can understand it, there are some facts. Palmitic acid has the highest share of all fatty acids in the human body. So have in mind that when you bring it in from the outside, there is much, much more than you bring in already in your body. It is 20 to 30% in the human adipose tissue that is palmitic acid, and that is symptomatic to most mammals. Also, palmitic acid is synthesized by the body from substances that the body has in itself. So you don't need to bring it in. It is synthesized by other fatty acids, carbohydrates, and amino acids. And the amount in the tissue that you have is regulated by the body itself. The only thing is, when you bring it in from the outside, then synthesis from the inside is reduced. Some conclusions on the influence on health, and you have to talk very long to people who know, so that they say, yeah, there may be something, but it is not really bad. It is sometimes even positive in case of diabetes. When you replace carbohydrates by palmitic acid, that has a positive effect. What you have to say is that to a limited extent, palmitic acid increases the low density cholesterol. However, that is only statistically. Nobody has seen an influence on clinical effects. That means people are not getting sick from it. And also what you can say is an intake of up to 40 grams per day has no negative effect. So when you see 40 grams per day of palmitic acid, even if it came from palm oil only, that would mean 100 grams of palm oil per day. And then that would be so much. When you see that we also eat other oils and fats, it would be 200 or 300. That any effect that you can measure might come from too high fat intake and cannot be linked to palmitic acid. Some other aspects on palm oil, which are linked to palm oil wrongly. Some pollutants by refining, where campaigning was started. It is the MCPD esters. And the question is, where do they come from? And you can see that you can find up to 10 milligram per kilogram in palm oil. The European Food Safety Agency, EFSA, recommended in 2018 that a safe daily intake would be 2 picograms per kilogram body weight. And you see here, 100 picogram would be in a kilogram of palm oil. When you have 50 kilograms of body weight, then already you could eat a kilogram of palm oil and you would not be over the threshold limit. An FAO WHO expert committee even allows 4 picograms. And here is something very important. Some organizations say Yes, we are against palm oil, but when we are fair, we have to say that a badly refined sunflower oil may hold more lipid pollutants than a well-refined palm oil. So these pollutants are not palm oil specific, but generic in uncareful refined oil. And that is something which the EFSA found. I just show this to you very briefly. So you see here, it harms the kidneys in 10% of the cases, and this is all about sperms and reproduction of people. And you see that you can find some effects, but that is below the limits. When you are a refiner, what you can do to avoid excess 3 MCPD formation is bleach below 95 degrees C, use activated bleaching earth, acid activated, because that removes the glycidyl esters. That is a glycidyl ester. And what is very important, so that it's not formated anymore, ensure that the chlorine level is below 200 ppm. That should of course read 2018, because I'm not a prophet. The MCPD threshold value in food is not exceeded in Germany, except slightly for infant nutrition, but it is because some parents give the babies exactly the same thing every day. So that is a bad nutrition anyway, but then it could slightly be over. But that is the 2 picograms. It's not the 4 picograms of FAO and WHO. Now, another very emotional issue or picture, campaigning by environmentalists. What you can see is that campaigning aims at certain users of palm oil, and these are the people who have brands, valuable brands where the impact is much higher and where the tendency by the manufacturers is that they easily give in to any demand because they want to save their brand. Just for you as an information, if you have if we had the Rama brand in Germany, one of the most important margarine brands in Europe, the brand value, just the name and what was linked to it 25 years ago was something like 250 million US dollars. So you don't bring that at stake. So the potential for blackmailing is of course much higher. And the first targets, as I have explained, was Unilever for margarines. Later, since 10 years, it's also body care, and Nestlé for sweets. And these campaigns are, yeah, you could, I say it simply, they are unfair. I could have more hard words, but I don't do that. What you see here is a campaign against Nestlé, where somebody takes out the Kit Kat sweet and finds in the pack a cut-off gorilla finger. And then you have even worse pictures. You have that Kit Kat finger, this gorilla, sorry, not gorilla, orangutan finger cut, and the blood comes out. So this is, of course, has nothing to do with the facts. It is purely emotional and made to force Nestlé to follow what Greenpeace thought was necessary. And the question that we have ourselves is, the food industry a justified and a fair, or just a tactical target? And to know that, we have to see how palm oil is used. And you can see here, it's the European Union, that 49% is used of the oil that is imported, palm oil that is imported, for biodiesel, and 12% for other energy. We just take it and pour it into an incineration plant to generate heat and electricity. This altogether is 61%, while the total usage in Europe for food is only 30. And when you go to Germany, it is not 40, it is not 30, it is only 17. But still, the target is the branded food industry, because nobody can tackle biodiesel, because the perception of people is biodiesel in itself is a good thing. And if we would talk about rapeseed oil and biodiesel, I could explain to you that it is not a good thing and was never a good thing. What we say joking is that the farmer can, with what he gets from the field, when you deduct everything that has to be deducted, he can go with his tractor once around that field. But anyway, rape is not the issue today. And when you see the total world energy usage at present, it is 23%, which means that 1/4 of the palm oil is simply burnt. And that is also the reason why you need new acreage. The usage, as I said, is used as an oil in the countries of origin, as a fat in colder regions, in detergents, and that is then not the palm oil, but the palm kernel oil, but that is linked to palm oil. There is no palm kernel oil without palm oil, as a source for detergents and for oleochemicals, and of course in the last 20 years as a source for bioenergy. What you see is that orang-utans are the carrier for the NGO's message, although it is doubtful whether they are really linked to it. But it is a very emotional message that you can carry on. And now the question is, how did everyone react? And the sad thing is that the campaigning started after the reaction had already been there. We had two very big global food initiatives, sustainability, that was WWF and Unilever in 1997. That was sustainable fishing. And when I was CEO of the Unilever fish business, I was the global issues leader for that part. And I was also involved in sustainable palm oil. That was the second initiative. So you see that it's 5 years later, but it was triggered by an NGO and the industry jointly. And then they founded the Roundtable Sustainable Palm Oil, RSPO. And there was a conference in 2003 where a lot of people came, and an agreement a year later on the formation, a formal foundation of the RSPO with some rules. And that RSPO has a board of governors, and you see that everyone is in. The plantations, producers, manufacturers, the whole chain, but also environmental issue NGOs and social issues NGOs. By the way, first certification of certified sustainable palm oil in Brazil was 2011 for Agropalma. So this is the commitments, the 8 commandments which the RSPO had. And while you can quickly read through it, I highlighted 2 of them because it is very important for the importance of palm oil for the region. First of all, you have, of course, that environmental responsibility. You have to conserve the natural resources, and you have to conserve biodiversity. But there is also people, and there is poor people in that region. There are people who were not employed, who were not educated, there was no school, and so on. So these 2 things, I think, are the most important. All the others are also important, but when you go for these 2, then automatically you follow also the other 6. And here are some quotes of the CEO of Roundtable Sustainable Palm Oil. And what he said is that, unfortunately, we can't get the attention of the people to soybean or other things, because deforestation is at least as bad, most likely worse. And also, this is also a very, very important statement. Having the big companies in the boat was easy. And in this case, I mean the big producing companies. But now it's about the smallholders. And that is very, very difficult because simply they don't understand. And the good news is by 2020, 25% of the world's palm oil production is certified. And you see also that palm oil users like Unilever, they are committed. They produce brochures and of course they praise themselves for what good they did. In 2014, certified palm oil became available for biofuels. Local agencies were founded in the individual countries, like for instance FONAP in Germany, and they achieved 95% of certified palm oil in all food products in 2017 already, and 75% of all palm oil use. What do you think now? You think now it was a good idea, the effort pays off, we did a great job, and now we have to harvest. The contrary is the case. Despite all of that, the European Parliament voted to ban all palm oil in biofuels. And I can tell you that we had a palm oil conference in Berlin last year, and I invited many politicians, and guess how many came? Nobody. They don't want their prejudice disturbed by facts. And the other thing is, it's not better in the market. Despite all of that progress, manufacturers label their products no palm oil, free of palm oil, and it is simply to please the public, although they might know that palm oil is by far not worse than others. And I brought a chart from Mr. Schonfield and Mr. Dumoulin from 2005, and you can see that they did a life cycle assessment for all the oils that were used for margarine at that time. And wherever you go, you see that palm oil is not the worst. It is always the best, except for this one here, which is eutrophication. I won't explain this. I think when you see the presentation in the internet, you can go through that. You can also go to the original when you're interested. The question now is, what if there were no palm oil? First of all, what you would have is a turmoil in the countries where it's produced. It would reduce the standard of living. They would return to poverty because they partly live on it. And it is Malaysia with 33 million people and Indonesia with 270 million inhabitants. And we will see later that almost as many as Malaysians exist, so many Indonesians live on palm oil. And I talked to the Indonesian ambassador, and he is a diplomat, of course. So what he would not say is, let us act on our own. We are not a colonial power. We are not a colonized power. We are self-determined and we are responsible. And Indonesia shows that from day to day with hundreds of initiatives and also participating in all these roundtables. They don't need permanent advice. And what you can say is that the advice, especially from Europe, is very hypocrite. It is so easy to point with your finger to somebody else. But there was a very nice picture of one of our former presidents. He said, remember always, when you point with a finger to others, 3 of your fingers are pointing back to yourself. And he would also say, you shouldn't be that nervous. You logged your woods long ago, and that was in many countries the basis for wealth. Why shouldn't we do that? And what they do, they don't log just for fun. And also, and that is very, very important, Europeans and also Americans are a bit more, you have to live according to what we think is right for power reasons. Europeans are hypocrite, and they say, we know everything better. And he would say, you judge the world with a rich man's eye. But what would he say? What he would say is, instead of all, or despite of all the logging we are accused of, Germany is, as the most wooded country in the EU, has less wood than we have. And I will just do a very short excursion with you to this slide. You see here the wood cover of Malaysia, almost 70%, Indonesia 53%. Japan 68%, but all of the part of Japan where there is wood can't use for agricultural land because it is alpine-like. And then you can see that Germany is down here. Even countries where you think Siberia must be full of wood are less than they are. And for you, as a comparison, of course, Brazil, you have 61%. And when I talk about self-determination, I don't mean that you have no responsibility, but I think that we should have more trust that you learn to use that responsibility prudently. Okay, 23 million people in Indonesia are living on palm oil. Imagine 23 million people. And the income from palm oil helped them to reduce poverty from 60% in 1970 to 10% in 2018. They had education. When I was there, I saw the schools, which didn't exist before, mainly near to the plantations or on the big plantations. For the first time, these people had electricity, they had clean water, and so on and so on. And the other thing is, while palm oil only uses 7% of the world's oil plant acreage, it accounts for 1/3 of the world's production of fats and oils. So palm oil uses 0.4% of the world's agricultural land only. And Indonesia will go on to increase their production by 25% within the next 5 years. And they will also reduce fossil energy in their country. So what if there were no palm oil? We would need 6 times the acreage to replace it by other vegetable oils and fat. We would have no sufficient and no secure oil and fat supply for the world. And that would hit the lower income countries because unfortunately palm oil is also by far the cheapest oil. So if they would have to buy soybean oil, it would be much, much, much higher. We have no alternative if we don't apply modern techniques such as hardening or genetic modification, which are both banned in the Western countries. A price increase for food, moderate only in industrial countries, but substantial in the others. Not enough consistent food for a lot of products, and many, many detergent products. There is no production possible at the moment because we have no replacement for palm oil. These may be the questions for the future. Will Malaysia further weaken? You saw that in the production figures that it goes down. What about the acreage? Is there enough palm oil? Sustainability? Plant diseases? And my personal beliefs are the following. Will Malaysia further weaken? Possibly. The reason why Malaysia goes down is it is bad management. The Indonesian palm oil plantations are much better managed. It is a lack of replantings. Replanting when an oil plant comes to the end of its life cycle, replanting is relatively expensive. We have cut back in fertilizers when the income is relatively low. So it may well be that it will take quite some time for Malaysia to come back. Will we need more acreage? No. However, if we extremely extend biofuels from palm oil, then there is absolutely no limit to what you need. And all the deforestation in the past years were not because the food industry needed it. And more we see that mineral oil companies buy themselves into plantations because they are also pressed by NGOs, for instance, to use renewable energy. And that is the cheapest and best way to have renewable energy. Is there enough palm oil to secure the feed, to feed the growing population and the growing middle class? Yes. The problem which we have is smallholders. If smallholders had the same yield on their farms than the big companies, we would have an enormous increase in palm oil. But they don't understand the game. I give you one example. When you replace an oil palm, you have that little plant, that little palm, and there is a test for that little palm. And you could test it and see how much that palm would yield, whether it's a good palm or not. That test costs 25 cents. They don't use it. What they do is they plant every palm, and after 5-6 years, they see whether they are good or not. Until that time, that palm has cost them $2.50 rather than 25 cents for the first test. It has occupied the space, and the 5 years period begins again when they cut it down. And so there is a lot to do with the smallholders to let them understand that they could live much better and also much more comfortable when they make themselves acquainted to some of the modern ways of planting. Will sustainability further improve? Yes, if everyone understands that the rules need to be followed, and that there are no people who say, if everyone follows it, that's fine, and it's all the others that have to do it, not myself. And too many still come away with it. One of the critical things, I think, is protection against plant diseases in that monoculture. When you fly into Malaysia, then you see it like a chessboard. One palm every 8 meters, the whole country. And I asked the people in the year 2000, aren't you not afraid? Because we had a tree disease from a tree virus in Europe, and you couldn't do anything about it. The trees were all dying. I asked them, aren't you not afraid of a virus or something like that? Because when a virus comes in, all your plantations are gone. And I guess you are possibly familiar with the banana disease. And we could have used the past 30 years to develop plants that are protected against diseases and which are genetically differentiated so that not everything dies. And the last one, when other countries boom, like Colombia and Brazil, will they do things right? I can only say, hopefully, they are clever. It is almost always much cheaper to get things right first time rather than to repair it later. As a summary, I hope that you're better equipped now to come to an own conclusion about palm oil. And now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Wow, excellent presentation, Michael. Thank you very much for your time and for presenting this very interesting subject.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
I'll ask the audience if they have questions to write on the chat, and I will switch to Portuguese.
Yes.
Bom, pessoal, acho que da minha parte eu achei que foi uma boa apresentação, espero que vocês tenham gostado. Só resumindo os pontos aí que ele cobriu, que eu anotei aqui, que eu gostaria de comentar. O primeiro, ele começou dizendo que a ciência é baseada em fatos, e todos nós sabemos disso, e todos nós temos a nossa responsabilidade de sempre falar dos nossos assuntos baseado em fatos. Ele deixou de lado a política, a percepção, os interesses pessoais. Ele comentou sobre os aceleradores de ações e decisões, como, por exemplo, guerras, né? Que é um dos aceleradores, quer dizer, decisões e ações são tomadas rapidamente em épocas de guerra, assim como tragédias e epidemias, né, como a gente está vendo agora. Ele falou sobre o aumento de consumo de óleos e gorduras, com a classe média passando de 3 bilhões para 5 bilhões de pessoas em 20 anos. Ele comentou também sobre ele fez várias comparações entre óleos e gorduras, ele comparou, explicou, fez definições, deu definições, contou uma história muito interessante do óleo de palma, comentou sobre os rendimentos, né, do óleo de palma e do óleo de palmiste. Depois ele passou para o lado da política da Malásia, sobre o óleo de palma, e o óleo de palma entrando nos Estados Unidos, e o óleo de palma sendo visto de uma forma muito negativa aqui nos Estados Unidos, como óleos, os famosos óleos tropicais, e competindo com a soja. Depois ele passou a falar sobre fatos, né, sobre os efeitos do 3-MCPD, que hoje está muito em moda, esse assunto. Apresentou gráficos e dados sobre o uso de óleo de palma em biodiesel, em energia, alimento, oleoquímica. Depois houve uma dissertação aí sobre o óleo de palma e o meio ambiente. Finalmente, o que aconteceria se não houvesse óleo de palma no mundo. Então, esse foi um pequeno resumo aqui dos pontos que eu anotei. Perguntas? Hey, Michael, can you read the questions on the chat? I think there is one from Cesar Rabelo.
I will try, so I have to exit the presentation mode.
You can exit the presentation and go straight.
I hope that works. Yes, I see you again. I see also the chat.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I can't open it.
Okay, so the question is, are industries interested in working with more sustainable and or innovative ways of palm oil culture than monoculture? What are the alternatives to reduce deforestation and maintain yields?
At the end, what the problem is with sustainability in general is that, for instance, when you go to the German consumers, when you ask them in the streets, would you pay more for sustainable products? They say yes, of course. It is a question like when you ask them, do you beat your wife? And they, of course, say no. But when they then go into the supermarket, it's the single penny that counts. So what we have to make sure is that there is a certain pressure, that more sustainable products are offered. The second one that we have to make sure is that sustainability is not a religion. It is sometimes very difficult when you have followed advice or demand of of NGOs, and you have done everything, and then everything is okay, and they come with the next demand. That is a very difficult thing, because there is a limit to what you can pay, and even if there is not so much a limit of what German consumers can pay, we are only 80 million of the 8 billion, and all the rest has less money in the pocket. And that is what I said. We see that the world with many of us see the world with a rich man's eye. At the end, Europeans could also buy everything away from others. Are you still there, Paolo? Okay, if I only wanted to make sure that, because the pictures that I see, they don't move, I wanted to make sure that you are still there.
Yes.
So what you can do is, I think what is the best, make sustainability a competitive advantage. If I would set up a new plantation today, I would wait and sit together with a lot of stakeholders and listen to them. And then I would try to set up the best plantation that I can make, because that would be a competitive advantage. And when you plan it carefully, then at the end, what we see from sustainability, normally it is less expensive, because you don't use unnecessary material. And normally also what you get is a slightly higher price. But you can't expect that you get a much higher price. Did that answer the question?
Cesar, can you make a... Oh, yeah, he said yes. Thank you. Next question from Eduardo. He's asking how much of the 25% of sustainable palm is being commercialized. Some years ago, only 50% was commercialized with a premium price.
It depends where you are. What you can't expect is that you get a high premium. What you can expect is that you get a slightly higher price. When you come, I come again back to my home country. When you come to Germany, as I showed you, almost 100% of the palm oil that goes into food is certified. So they have no choice than buying certified palm oil, because they have it all on their packs. They are all labeling it. So once you label yourself, you are an angel, you can't come back a year later and say, no, I'm a devil. So what you also do, you paint yourself into a corner. And this time I say, this is a positive corner. It very much depends on the emotions and the will to go for sustainability in several countries. When I, for instance, go from Germany to Russia, where the average income of people is, I guess, 10%. The first thing that they will have in mind is, how can I afford it? And only the second or third thought will be, it should be sustainable. So what you have to live with is that in a world of very different attitudes, convictions, and purchasing power, we will not, at least not during my lifetime, and I guess also not during yours, although I hope that you will all be 110 years old, you will see that 100% will be certified or sustainable.
Right.
And I also warn everyone who has something, who produces something, who uses something, never ever promise 100%. There will always be somebody who proves that it is only 99, and then you are a liar. Restrict yourself in praising yourself, and if you think you can make 95, then tell the people you are aiming at more than 90. and never say it will be 100. You will never ever be able to do that.
Obrigado. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Pessoal, mais perguntas? Alguém quer perguntar mais alguma coisa?
Did I understand it's 5 minutes to go?
Yes.
You see, there is some rest of my Portuguese from my times when I was responsible for South America.
Eu gostaria de fazer duas perguntas, eu mesmo. Uma é que eu vejo aqui nos Estados Unidos uma entrada silenciosa, um aumento silencioso no aumento de consumo de óleo de palma. Apesar de não ser divulgado, hoje muitos produtos nas prateleiras dos supermercados são preparados com óleo de palma. Por exemplo, a pasta de amendoim, que é comida típica do americano, hoje é difícil encontrar uma pasta de amendoim que não tenha óleo de palma, porque o americano quer uma pasta de amendoim que seja homogênea, que não precisa misturar, né, porque a pasta de amendoim solta o óleo, e para ficar mais cremoso. Então, eu quero perguntar para ele a respeito desse lado positivo da entrada do óleo de palma aqui nos Estados Unidos. Eu vou perguntar para ele também sobre a alimentação infantil, né? Antigamente se preparava o leite em pó para dar a mamadeira para a criança, e hoje aqui nos Estados Unidos também a gente vê as fórmulas com óleo de palma na composição da fórmula, né? Então, eu gostaria de saber dele como que ele vê essa alimentação infantil com o óleo de palma na fórmula. So, my personal questions, Mike. One is, I see a silent increase of palm oil consumption here in the US. Although no advertisement, but we see in many foods the presence of palm oil. For example, peanut butter. When I go out to the supermarket, I see almost all the peanut butters with palm oil in the composition to make it more spreadable, more homogeneous, no releasing of any oil. So I see fried snacks. Almost all the fried snacks here are fried in oils with palm oil composition. How do you see this increase in palm oil in the foods here in the US? Isn't this a positive aspect of introduction, based on the fact that there is no replacement for hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils?
It very much depends on the product. When you for instance, use it for peanut butter, then you would need a soft hardened product. Otherwise, it would be so stiff. When you fully harden soybean, the melting point is 69 degrees, and you can't melt it in your mouth. It is like a chewing gum in your mouth. When you go to margarine, you could use hardened fats and oils, and I think hardening is not so much an issue in the US. And you could interesterify it with oil, and then you get a very good product. Unilever had fully hardened oil until the year 1998 or so. Interesterified with oil, and that of course had no trans. And the policy of Unilever was always be lower in trans than butter. Butter has 5 to 9% trans, and the butter industry, of course, they were fighting back. They told you that there is a bad trans that is in margarine and there is a good trans that is in butter. But you could do that until one of the supermarket chains here introduced non-hardened margarine, and all of a sudden everybody wanted it. So it is emotional. There is no fact behind it and no health aspect. When it comes to deep frying, when you buy deep fried goods in Europe, normally they are claimed with sunflower oil. It is simply because nobody dares to write palm oil, unless you don't have to declare it. So when you go to a bakery and you buy a deep fried piece of cake, then there is no label on it. Then they simply do it because it is really substantially cheaper. And when it goes to the United States, I think the problem which they had, this story about the bad palmitic acid, that generates from the 1960s, and such story uses up. It is used up, and there are too many people today who say, no, that's not so. And there are too many other issues. When you see that Village study that went against linolenic acid in a really very harsh style, and everybody from that moment onwards said not too much linolenic acid, so the others could come back. Still, I believe, given the fact that for me, the US are the only really imperial power. China and Russia are coming closer, but the only imperial power that dares to use its power to protect the own market, however always disguised in something, is the US. And as long as fat consumption rises, because population rises or whatever, and the soybean farmers are not harmed, I think they will let it go. As soon as, there are the presidential elections next year, and if soybean farmers would be unable again to export to China, I think the government would do everything to cut off supply of other fats and oils from other places in the world. So it has nothing to do with health. It has nothing to do whether it's suitable for a product. If you use hardening and interestrification, you can do any product you want. You don't need palm oil. What you need is palm kernel, because there is no replacement. So the playing ground for trade barriers is the palm oil, not the palm kernel oil.
Michael, thank you. We are short on time now. Just the last question about infant formulas. We see, in the past we used to give powder milk to babies. Nowadays it's formulas with palm oil in the formula. How do you see this trend of going with palm oil in baby formulas and the positive aspects of the palm oil in baby formulas, and why this is not promoted as a positive aspect of the palm oil?
No, I don't think that it is positive. I believe that it is money, it's the price. What I can say, to what I know, it is not negative as it was said, because you also saw that palmitic acid is in great quantities in your body, and that your body synthesizes it unless you bring something in from outside, and then it stops synthesizing to maintain the level. What you have to say is that when you see the latest findings, there is nothing better than mother milk. And what I would make sure is that in infant nutrition, you have enough DHA and EPA. I think that is the most important part of fatty acids in there. And when these are in, all the rest is not that important. But I think you would not find anyone on this planet who tells you that you can advertise palm oil in infant nutrition as positive. And I think when you look back into the past, it is a good achievement when you find people who say, no, I can't say it is positive, but it is somewhat neutral.
Okay.
Because it depends so much on the personality, it depends on the rest of the nutrition, it depends on the personal disposition of the infant and also, of course, of the adults. Whether you use it as a supplement to mother milk or you use it exclusively, and so on and so on. I think if I were a marketeer of such a company, I would not advertise it. I would simply keep my mouth shut.
All right. Thank you very much. We are short on time right now. We have some other questions from other people. Eduardo is asking. I'll make sure that you receive his questions and we keep this debate. This is a very interesting subject, and we would need probably a few days to keep this discussion going. Thank you very, very much, Michael. We appreciate your presentation, and I will switch to Portuguese.
I hope to see you next year in Brazil.
In person.
It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Good. Pessoal, muito obrigado pela participação. A gente está com um horário curto. Obrigado pelas perguntas. Eduardo, eu vou fazer as tuas perguntas chegarem no Michael. E outras perguntas que vocês tiverem, também, por favor, nos mande. Continuem prestigiando a SBOG, importantíssimo a participação de todos, fazer essa organização cada vez mais forte no Brasil. Nós temos muitas cabeças pensantes de muita alta qualidade, organizações de muito bom nível, e fazendo esse trabalho juntos, nós vamos conseguir melhorar muito a qualidade dos trabalhos que fazemos no Brasil.